Is to create a country within your country.
We can't afford to be silent anymore.
Sadly, my religion in the current situation is an absolute mess.
Well, now to the holy war of words that's broken out between a leading Adelaide Islamic leader and Australia's top Muslim cleric. He's attacked the Grand Mufti for not speaking out against extremist views and recent deadly terror attacks. And as Rodney Lose reports, it's now causing many Muslims to cower in fear from the rest of the community.
I cannot go to bed calmly, believing that there are Australians worried. If the Grand Mufti issues a fatwa against ISIS and all Australian imams endorse that fatwa and sign under it, that would bring a lot of comfort to the Australians and would bring a lot of peace back to Australia.
Sometimes I do feel scared that everyone's looking at me, or they could probably call names or try to pull my scarf off, because this actually happened once.
Of course, I'm scared as well. I'm scared from terrorism as well. Me and my people are the victims of ISIS. Of course I'm scared.
They're the words you'd expect to hear from non-Muslim Australians, living in fear of Islamic terror in Australia, that Muslims aren't doing enough to make everyone feel safe.
The Grand Mufti is doing everything he can, but it's not enough. In reality, it's not enough.
Imam Sheikh Tawhidi is a Shia Muslim leader in South Australia, and tonight he's taking a stand. He says, like many Australians, he lives in fear, and he's calling out his fellow Muslims to take a stand with him. In particular, Australia's Grand Mufti, who he says is not doing enough to make Australians feel at ease with Islam.
I believe we're in 2016, heading towards 2017. Having leaders that do not speak English is a big no for us, because we need a leader that can interact completely 100% with the diverse communities within South Australia and Australia.
Number one, he says it's time Australia's Grand Mufti issued a fatwa. That is, a decree against ISIS and terrorism, rather than just supporting other fatwas, and make sure it's supported by the leaders of Sunni Islamic organisations.
We need to make sure that there's a chain linking them back to the Grand Mufti of condemnation and endorsements against ISIS.
But Imam Tawhidi goes even further. Perhaps, he says, it's time for a new Mufti altogether, one who speaks English.
We need a leader that can connect directly with other communities. Language barriers are no longer acceptable.
He says there should be no funding either for Muslim organisations that aren't firm on speaking out against terrorism.
If we have an Islamic organization that hasn't condemned ISIS since the day it was established, has never stood against terrorism in any statements, I don't believe they're eligible for community grants and community benefits and funding from the government for any of their events.
Imam Tawhidi expects criticism from the Muslim community, but he says he believes it's the only way forward if there is to be peace between Muslims and non-Muslims in Australia.
I believe there are well over 500 imams in Australia. Well over 500 imams. There's only a handful that are condemning. Let's say if there are 500, we hardly even have 50 condemns whenever something happens. Therefore, I am worried, and I believe the rest of Australia is also worried. And therefore, I do not blame them when they say the imams are silent, because it's only a handful that are speaking out.
I think for any plan to work, it has to include not a single dimension of society, but I think it has to include a host of organizations and members of societies.
Director of the University of South Australia's Centre for Islamic Thought and Education, Professor Muhammad Abdullah, says Imam Tawhidi's plan is simplistic and doesn't take into account the complexities that drive young Muslims to extremism.
Unemployment among young Australian Muslims is very, very high. We know from research that when job applications were sent with Muslim names, they were rejected almost 100% of the times. However, we mustn't always blame marginalization or racism.
But Imam Tawhidi says his plan does have many facets, including establishing the Shia Muslim Youth Council, a nationwide mentoring group aimed at giving young Muslims a voice and guidance.
Firstly, the Shia Muslim Youth Council will be running a number of workshops that will target the problems that we have in our society to make sure that we give our youth a place within the society and that the youth do not feel cornered and that they do not feel unwanted within the community.
Because when it comes to terrorism, it's often young Muslims who suffer the most. They suffer through the attacks and then suffer backlash after.
If I'm alone, like that time I was alone, I actually feel really scared. I don't know if they're gonna come and attack me or punch me or bash me up or something like that.
Fatima Talar has joined the group hoping to foster better understanding between Muslims and non-Muslims.
The scarf that I have on my head is nothing different to what you have on your neck. It's basically simply a scarf that just representation of my faith.
5AA Talkback host Jeremy Cordeaux says it's about time Muslim leaders took the lead, like Imam Tawhidi.
Imam, I congratulate you. I think that's a very good step in the right direction.
And the fact his plan is simplistic is why it may work.
Now, if the man is saying there has been a deafening silence when it comes to condemnation among the Islamic leaders of atrocities around the world perpetrated by the Islamic extremists, he's absolutely right.
Meanwhile, the Grand Mufti wouldn't comment. Imam Tawhidi says his plan may seem simple to some, but he believes it will work. He says whenever terror is committed in the name of Islam, his organisation will be the first to condemn and the first to help.
The Pope, God bless the Pope, Pope Francis, he came out today and he said, money drives terrorism, not Islam. And I stand by the Pope's words. We cannot afford to be soft. We need to issue strong fatwas and direct the masses against terrorism.